Research by two banking consultants shoots down assertions that international rating agencies have been reckless in downgrading Ghana's economic platforms. Also in this bulletin, Office of the Registrar of Companies extends deadline for filing of annual returns and renewals for businesses and organizations. Plus, lack of policy document on employee performance and compensation breeding favoritism in many businesses. We will tell you why.
You can only manage these people based on the documents. Without that, managing them becomes a problem. And that it then leads to favoritism. It leads to looking at people's faces to do things.
We have details of these and many others lined up for you. Please stay. Always a joy to have you on. I am Pius Kojobaka. Let's now settle for the details. And there is no evidence from both quantitative and qualitative data review that rating agencies S&P, Moody's and Fitch have been reckless in downgrading the Ghanaian economy 11 times last year. Now that's according to findings of a research by banking consultants Dr. Richmond Etuahini and KB Frimpong. Now the research said though Ghana has a record of political stability and strong economic growth in the past, it has been wrestling with escalating inflation, a falling currency and of course a stubborn high budget deficit. There is more for you in this report.
The report said S&P, Moody's and Fitch all have defined default as failure to pay a material sum of interest or principal on a debt instrument on its due date, as well as a debt restructuring conducted in a manner deemed to be coercive, involuntary, and distressed. Due to this, the three rating agencies were not reckless in downgrading the Ghanaian economy. The global credit rating agencies have been criticized by President Akufo-Addo as reckless in their downgrades of the economy after the country defaulted on its debt obligations. The research identified that the three agencies have been conducting risk ratings of the economy as far back as 2003 and have been issuing some positive results for bonds issued on the international capital markets. For instance, the $750 million bond issued in 2007 was 4 times oversubscribed. It furthered that credit rating agencies have been an integral part of modern capital markets, and the assessment on sovereign entities have been increasingly used as benchmarks by regulators and global investors. In conclusion, the report urged the government to accelerate economic growth to aid taxes collection as well as reduce its appetite for borrowing.
All right, so joining me is banking consultant Dr. Richmond Etuahini for more on this research he conducted. Now, sir, pleasure you could join me on Business Live. We have seen the report. What are the main issues the report seems to address, really?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. From the reports that we did, the research that we did, we realized that we have received positive rating over the past 16 years. That has even enabled us to borrow consistently from the market. At least the last one was 2021. We borrowed 3 billion. It was rated as B+ by Fitch. But the issue is that we haven't managed our debt very well. Unfortunately, we seem to have either overborrowed without putting the necessary measures in place. So in 2020, we were downgraded 11 times by these 3 rating agencies. Number one, like huge debt service obligation, dwindling foreign exchange, higher inflation, higher interest rate, bigger fiscal deficit, current account deficit, a whole host of issues. So they realized that, and the last one came in when government decided in December that he was going to suspend the foreign debts and pay interest payment in addition to the domestic then the country was actually proclaimed to have defaulted. So for me, what I have done and the research I've done since 2003 to today, I didn't see any part which the rating agencies were actually made a reckless rating, because they have consistently, let me repeat the word, consistently. It was only, the last one was in the 2022 where we were even downgraded, but it was not their fault. We have borrowed such a extent that our revenue generation, domestic revenue generation capacity was not enough to service the debt. Ukraine has come in. COVID has done his own job. But we haven't actually managed the debt to the best of our ability. So classifying as a default was no news to some of us, because there was a clear evidence that we have overborrowed and we are not able to manage our finances very well to meet the international targets.
Dr. Etuahini, now there are concerns that some of the methodologies used by these ratings agencies basically is unfair to developing nations like Ghana. Now, the concern is that it hurts the ability of developing countries to go for loans because, well, they are classified as high default risk.
Yeah, you see, nobody told you to go for international capital loan. And let me make this. Professor Jam Bafo-Dia, the president of President Ejekum Kufuor's foundation, he made a statement, and I wish all the Ghanaians would have listened to him. You know, when Ignatius Achampong, the former head of state, who came to take over the country in the 70s, he never borrowed a dime. He never borrowed a dime because he proclaimed Yentria. And I believe if I should enumerate some of the things he used the internal resources to do in this country, it will shock you, and it will shock you and shock you. Let me give you one example. Those of you who don't know, and who haven't read it, go to Pond Dam. When he created a Pond Dam for the electricity, he decided to produce water for Temaside. Go to Kumasi Barakesi. We didn't have Barakesi. We were using Wabi. We only use internal generation resources. Look at all the polyclinics. It was constructed by Champon without borrowing on international capital market. So if we have all these resources, the gold, now the oil has come into it, cocoa, side, and we cannot manage our own affairs. Ghanaian is incapable of ruling himself. You are blessed with so much resources. But instead of you looking focused and be very strategic, you tend to use a political agenda to run a national agenda. And that is why we find ourselves. We borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. But if you ask me, what have we got to show? So those who are saying that they are not fair to Africans, who told the Africans to go for ratings? If Africans can finance their economy, there is no need to go to international market to borrow. There is no need if we can manage our resources. Nobody forces us to go and borrow. If you read the literature, when Ghana wanted to borrow in 2007, when Dr. Bawumia was part of the team, they started doing their homework from 2023 before they go to 2027, trying to put the economy in order and fiscal discipline. Because at that time, we needed to borrow to build the Bui Dam. If you don't know, part of the Bui Dam was financed by President Ejekum Kufuor's His Excellency. So you could say that at least we have that to show. But today, those who are arguing, I'm sorry, those who are arguing that they are not fair to Africans, I don't know. But the methodology used for Ghana is the same methodology used recently on the British economy. And the British economy was downgraded. If British economy was downgraded, our reckless and unplanned and uncontrolled expenditure. So those who are arguing that, I've heard somebody saying it, he needs to have an empirical evidence. I'm speaking from empirical evidence for the last 20 years to tell you what I'm telling you. It's not good we Africans being emotional. You know, let me finish here.
All right.
There is what these Africans, especially we Ghanaians, where I come from, if you're not able to do well, you know who you turn to. This one is Obayifo. Look, who said Obayifo is not there? But who allow yourself to be tortured by Obayifo? It is you who led yourself there. So those who are arguing that, I don't think Africans can even set their own benchmark for credit rating. We should.
I was coming to that because there's been this view that it's about time that African countries should have a criteria, or better still, have their own rating agencies. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. Where are they going to get the money from? Let me tell you a story. I wanted to secure a funding for one of your reputable organizations in the sub-region. I don't want to mention their name. I took them to an international rating agent, international funding agency, and they were prepared to give them a huge sums of money. If I tell you the way the people presented themselves, I was even ashamed that day. We were doing Zoom. I was ashamed because the question that these rating agencies, the credit funding agencies were asking those the so-called managing directors or the chief executives, you shocked me. So how can we even set a rating agency?
So it's impossible.
The African countries can set a rating agency.
It's impossible, you say?
Let me ask you. It is impossible because the way we have run our economy, we have all the resources. Go to Congo DR. Go to Angola. We the biggest oil producer now, passing Nigeria. But have we been able to develop our own capacity to say that Africans are capable of ruling themselves or funding themselves? I doubt very much. I doubt very much.
All right. We shall leave the conversation here. For the purposes of time, we will leave the conversation here and, of course, continue subsequently. We are indeed grateful, Dr. Richmond Etuahini, for your time here on Business Live. We've got to move on to some other stories. And the lack of policy document to guide employee performance and compensation is affecting business growth as many employees feel demoralized. Now, the situation has called for a comprehensive data on human resource management for the country. Speaking to journalists after launching the HR Outlook and Benchmark survey by KPMG and the HR Management Institute, Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Human Resources Management, Ebenezer Agbeto, said it is time for HR practitioners to take steps to ensure that workers have proper compensation policies.
Space influenced the decision by partners including KPMG Ghana, MData, HR Network, and the Chartered Institute of Human Resource Management to conduct the survey. According to the partners, there is a lack of data on industry compensation and performance policy for many organizations in the country. Speaking to journalists, Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Human Resource Management, Ebenezer Agbeto, warned that lack of such policies in businesses' operations is affecting growth.
Wherever you are, documents that governs the behavior and the performance of workers must be seen to be in place. And I'm referring to policies and procedures. You must make sure systems are in place. Hence, you can only manage these people based on the documents. Without that, managing them becomes a problem. And that it then leads to favoritism. It leads to looking at people's faces to do things. But when you do that, at the end of the day, that in general demoralize employees because they feel that they are not being fairly treated. For you to practice well, I will appeal to every HR practitioner in Ghana, wherever you are. If you don't have policies and procedure manuals in place or employee handbook, make sure you get one done.
A memorandum of understanding was signed between the partners and KPMG to begin data gathering for the survey, which is expected to be concluded before the end of the year. Chief Executive of MData, Dr. Erica Fordaze, hinted that lack of proper data on the country's human resource space is causing growth setback for many businesses.
When I started training HR officials and practitioners, I came to the realization that there's a big gap. The gap is that they don't have the data. Those who even have the data is all over the place, right? It's not digitized, they have no means of putting it back together. So we decided to, first of all, create awareness. So this is the first level of creating awareness on the HR metrics and its relevance, how this can impact people management within organizations. So there is a big gap. Most organizations do not have the data.
Issues concerning inequality in compensation and staff salaries are expected to dominate discussions on the research.
Now, the Office of the Registrar of Companies has extended the deadline for filing of annual returns and renewals up to 30th September 2023. This is to provide some space to allow businesses and organizations file their annual returns and renewals. There is more in this report.
According to the Office of the Registrar of Companies, the extension of the deadline is to enable companies and businesses in default to complete the processes for filing their annual returns and renewals, which they invariably could not complete due to the downtimes experienced by the software application system through the period. A statement from the Office of the Registrar of Companies explained. It added that the deadline extension applies to business names, companies limited by shares, companies limited by guarantee, which are churches, schools, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, foundations, associations, unions, societies, charities, external companies, partnerships, and professional bodies.
And now, shareholders of rural banks have expressed dissatisfaction at the directive of government to halt payment of dividends. The Bank of Ghana's directive is due to the current economic challenges and, of course, the impact of the domestic debt exchange program. Executive Director at the Association for Rural Banks, Comfort Owusu, reveals shareholders are reluctant to invest more due to the present order. Anaya Ojima has more in this report.
In January this year, the central bank wrote to banks to suspend the declaration and payment of dividends and other distributions to shareholders. Banks hold more than 30% of the 83 billion cedis bonds that were swapped for new instruments. Arrangement under the domestic debt exchange program means that the lenders have suffered significant losses. Executive Director of the Association of Rural Banks, Comfort Owusu, explains measures are being taken to mitigate the negative impact of the debt exchange on the financial sector.
We still have some of our lockup funds not being paid, and the DDEP also has come with its own challenges. So that one is actually affecting the rural banks. We've done some, our banks, ARBFS Bank has done some submission to the Ministry of Finance for consideration so that we can get some funds to cushion the RCBs. So we are looking forward to get a positive response from the government.
In 2021, Amenfima Rural Bank paid over 2 million cedis to shareholders as dividends, representing a 30% return on investment, with each share attracting 6 pesos. This was after the expiration of a directive by the Bank of Ghana for deposit-taking institutions to halt payment of dividends in 2 financial years due to impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Though the bank's profit margins increased to 557 million from 401 million cedis in 2021, it is restrained from paying dividends to shareholders.
Any bank that has to pay dividends will have to write for approval from Bank of Ghana, which they have in that street. So you could see the shareholders are really not very happy because they were expecting that as long as the bank has been able to make some kind of profit, they should be able to get their dividends. But it's not so. So it's not easy today for us. We are trying to calm them down for the fact that when things are good, they will have their dividends.
Board Chairman Dr. Tony Obin says though finances of shareholders will be affected, it is necessary in efforts to salvage the Ghanaian economy.
So we cannot go against government policy not to pay dividends. So if that will help the economy recover, why not? We know, and you saw the reaction of our shareholders. They were very disappointed. I thought they had heard it on air or read it in the papers, but most of them hadn't seen that, so they were very disappointed. Sometimes it's very discouraging. But I think we have also explained to them the rationale for non-payment. We pray hard that by next year we should be in a position to pay dividend.
For Joy News, Nanaya Ochima reporting.
You're still watching Business Live here with me, Pius Kojo Baka. There is more stories after this. Hello, welcome back. The Ghana cedi ended the first half of this year with a better performance than the same period last year. According to Bloomberg, the cedi lost about 11.21% to the US dollar, yet was still classified among African currencies with worst spot returns. Here's more.
The local currency in the last 3 months has performed well against the US dollar prior to the announcement of an International Monetary Fund program, and after the pronouncement of the program, the cedi has kept its resilience against the American greenback. It has so far gained about 9% on the retail market since the announcement of the IMF program. However, some market watchers argue that it has benefited from the suspension of payments of principal and interest on external debt in December last year. Last week, there were reports that demand pressures for the American greenback eased, favoring the cedi. This may continue this week, all things being equal. Meanwhile, the Nigerian naira is the worst African currency so far this year. According to Bloomberg, it has lost about 39% value to the dollar. It is followed by the Angola kwanza and the Egyptian pound with year-to-date losses of 38.8% and 20% respectively.
I'm pretty sure you I understand economist Courage Boti joins us via phone for his perspective on this. He's the research lead of GCB Capital. Courage, pleasure you could join me on Business Live. I'm pretty sure you've seen the story about the cedi's performance for the first half of the year. Now, I want to know what could be the main reasons for the performance. Yes, we do know that the exchange program and, of course, going into the IMF deal could have played a part, but to what extent could be the reasons for the performance?
Well, good evening to your listeners. To put things in context, the cedi still recorded depreciation of a little over 20% on the interbank market yesterday. If you look at it on the retail market, then you are looking at something about 0.8% appreciation yesterday. But, I mean, generally, it's been a volatile first half of the year for the cedi, even though it's broadly contained relative to last year. You look at last year where we were recorded depreciation rate at some point over 50-60% really compared to what the trajectory has been this year. It's a relatively better situation. But what may have led to that relative stability, I think the suspension of external debt service is a big part of the reason. What drove the depreciation pressures in 2022 to a large extent was also portfolio reversals. The uncertainty on the market and the flight to safety from offshore investors. At this moment, the secondary bond market is practically inactive. It means that if you want to sell your bonds and exit the local market, you may not be able to do so because there are no demands for it. It plays a role also in the fact that the CD has been a bit stable because you are not seeing those pressures from portfolio repatriation that we saw in 2022. Then, of course, we made progress with the IMF. Eventually, we got a program. We succeeded with the external debt, the domestic debt restructuring, and all of those things really, which sort of brought some standstill because then people are expecting the next move will be some recovery really, and so they are looking for the interventions that will follow. And so decisions on whether to speculate on FX or not will not be straightforward because you don't know what the next move is going to be. So those who had some money in anticipation of the IMF approval were taking profit. Those who have hoarded some dollars would have been taking profit. So you saw those buy and sell actions happening along the way, which meant there was that volatility movement within a certain band. So I guess the stability is in contest relative to last year, but 21% depreciation is so pronounced, even for this year. But it's only favorably against last year because it's so worse last year, really.
Courage. So in a minute, how do we sustain this gain going forward?
Looking ahead, we need to implement the program and implement it well with credibility. A first review is impending. If we do the mid-year review and then we suggest to the investor market that we are making progress with the macro reforms and then the structural reforms that we are targeting, if we can successfully pass the first review, which will be done in September, and I believe the investment sometime in November, if we can successfully pass that, it is a good signal to the market that we are on course. And those will be some positives. Of course, we've not heard so much about Cocoa Board going to market this time round, but it's a likelihood. And if they go, the inflow.
I'm time bound, so if you can wrap up in a minute for me, quickly, your thoughts.
Yeah, should support the CDC stability, really. So, yeah, there are positives for the CD, but then there is still uncertainty in the outlook, which we need to gather.
Research leader, GCB Capital, Courage Buti, we are indeed grateful for your time. And that's it for the program for tonight. I am Pius Kojobaka. You can get business stories when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Let's connect in time tomorrow. Bye.